In this video, I will answer the following questions. 1. When did the biblical flood take place? 2. Did the flood affect the entire planet or only certain regions? 3. What was the cause of the flood, and how is it connected to the Watchers from the Book of Enoch? And 4. What is the truth about the roles of Enlil and Enki in triggering the flood? Question 1. When did the biblical flood take place? Before I answer, I want to clarify an important point. I believe that it is not 2,000 years since the birth of Jesus, but only 1,000 years. Basically, the correct year would be 1025, not 2025. This idea is supported by the theory known as the made-up 1,000 years theory, or phantom time theory. Originally proposed by the German historian Herbert Illig in the 1990s, the theory claims that a period of around 1,000 years, mainly between the 600s and 1600s, was artificially added to the historical timeline. Illig claims that Emperor Otto III and Pope Sylvester II altered the chronology in order to symbolically reign in the year 1000. They would have artificially added at least 297 years, but the theory is extended by some scholars to about 1,000 years. This theory is supported by several evidences such as lack of consistent archaeological finds for the period 600 to 900 AD, conflicting medieval documents and inconsistencies in chronologies, artifacts and buildings that appear too advanced for the period attributed, chronological inconsistencies observed in Byzantine, Chinese, and Islamic histories. Also, the made-up 1,000-year theory is supported by numerous ancient documents, coins, and inscriptions in which the year is written in this way. We see in these images that the year is written in forms such as I-548, I-754, J680, J782, and so on. We notice that instead of the number 1, either the letter I or the letter J appears. These letters I and J come from the name of Isis or Jesus. So the year I-548 actually reads 548 years since Jesus or the birth of Jesus. Those who have altered history have simply replaced the letter I or J with the number 1, thus artificially adding 1,000 years to the official chronology. Therefore, we are actually in the year 1025 since Jesus and not 2025. But why would anyone want to add an extra 1,000 years? What would be gained by this change? Who would benefit from such a falsification? Well, there are several reasons. 1. Controlling history means controlling the future. Author George Orwell wrote in the novel 1984, "He who controls the past controls the future." Manipulating the historical narrative implicitly offers control over the collective consciousness. What could be gained by doing so? Manipulating the national and religious identity of peoples, hiding advanced civilizations or eras that contradict official dogma, such as Tartary or Atlantis, artificially creating an idea of a peak of civilization in the modern era, suggesting that everything before was primitive or dark. 2. Hiding a golden age or forbidden civilization. If an advanced civilization existed in the past and has been erased from history, then adding centuries to the chronology would help erase its traces. What would be gained? Maintaining a monopoly on technology and knowledge. Discrediting anomalous archaeological finds, artifacts that seem too old for official history, and prevent people from understanding the real origin and complexity of humanity. Third reason, legitimization of empires, religions, or historical figures. A falsified chronology can make certain characters or religions seem older, more divine, or more fundamental than they really were. This can reinforce the authority of kings, rulers, or saviors who would otherwise not fit into the real chronology. For example, Alexander Macedon, also known as Alexander the Great, a character heavily promoted in recent decades as a great hero and savior, was in reality the opposite of what is said about him in movies and books. I will not go into details, but it is important to mention that he was in reality an extremely evil being, and now, in movies and history books, he is portrayed as a great hero. There are also people who claim that Napoleon Bonaparte was a fictional character who never actually existed. Other historical figures who, although in reality played a positive role and helped mankind, are either presented in a negative light or have been forgotten or erased from history altogether. Other purposes of artificially inserting 1,000 years are hiding the fact that we are in fact much closer to biblical events or recent cataclysms, masking global resets, some quite recent, a solar catastrophe, the collapse of an advanced civilization, reinventing dark ages, such as the so-called Dark Ages, to fill an artificially created chronological gap. In my opinion, it was not Emperor Otto III and Pope Sylvester II who altered the chronology and added these 1,000 years. The two may not even have existed in reality. They are fictional characters. The ones who made the alteration are beings like Marduk, along with other members of the Galactic Federation of Worlds, who took control of the planet about 500 years ago. I uploaded to the short videos a video where I was talking about the battle that took place over Nuremberg, Germany in 1561. You can clearly see in this picture a black arrow. Well, that is actually the artistic representation of a spaceship used by the Nachwaffen Group, or Dark Fleet. And those cylinders are ships that belong to the civilizations of the Inner Earth, of Agartha, or maybe even of the surface civilizations. The fact that the current civilization is in this deplorable state means that then, in 1561, the Dark Fleet, or Nachwaffen Group, helped by the Solar Warden, defeated the Earthlings and the intraterrestrials of Agartha and took power over the planet. Dark Fleet and Solar Warden are the military divisions with which the Galactic Federation of Worlds conquer planets and civilizations in the galaxy. The Federation also possessed the technology to time travel, that is, into the past or the future, to alter timelines for their own benefit, which explains the erasure of Tartary from history. There's a saying, "History is written by the victors," and this phrase clearly reflects the idea that those who win wars also have control over how events are recorded, interpreted, and passed on. The victors can decide which truths to preserve, which facts to distort or erase, and which figures to glorify or demonize. Now, let me return to the initial question. When did the biblical flood take place? Well, the Bible doesn't give an exact date, but the biblical chronologies estimate the flood thus. James Ussher's chronology places it in 2348 BC. Septuagint chronology puts it between 3200 to 3300 BC. Other evidence and theories suggest that the Epic of Gilgamesh and other Sumerian and Babylonian texts describe a flood that occurred between 2700 to 2900 BC. The Black Sea Flood, theorized by William Ryan and Walter Pittman, may have occurred around 5600 BC and may be the source of the biblical legend. Taking the 1,000 years artificially added theory into account, biblical chronologies would indicate that the flood occurred about 3,348 to 4,300 years ago, and the Black Sea Flood theory would suggest about 6,600 years ago. In the book The Forgotten Genesis, written by Radu Sinamar, it is stated that the flood would have occurred about 5,000 years ago. I consider this date to be correct, because on the one hand, I trust the information in Radu Sinamar's books, and on the other hand, it falls within the time period presented above, between 3,348 to 4,300 and 6,600 years ago. Thus, the answer to the question, when did the biblical flood take place? It is about 5,000 years ago. If we accept that Jesus lived only 1,000 years ago, between the flood and Jesus, we have about 4,000 years. During this time period, I believe the Tartary civilization developed, which was later erased from history around 500 years ago. When extraterrestrial civilizations from the Galactic Federation of Worlds took control of the planet and made historical alterations that suited their agenda. Now I will answer the second question. 2. Did the flood occur across the entire planet or only in certain regions? The answer to this question can be found in the book Forgotten Genesis by Radu Sinamar. According to this book, the flood was not global, but limited to certain regions, in particular a large part of the Middle East and southeastern Europe. The book describes in detail, I saw vast expanses of land covered in water, starting from about ancient Cappadocia, from the middle of present-day Turkey down to Syria and Israel, and the swirling waters destroying everything in their path, like a tsunami or a huge flood. There was no longer a clear distinction between the Mediterranean shore and the land, so the biblical flood was not a global event. Also, in the book Forgotten Genesis by Radu Sinamar, it says, "If we consider the Bible and how the flood is presented in the text, it follows that the whole earth was covered by water. In fact, we have to consider how the people of that time understood what the earth was like. For them, there were no other continents. The area in and around which they lived was the whole world." One of the younger American majors made a pertinent remark at the time. The biblical flood does not seem at all to be the only one in human history. There are other traditions and populations that speak of a devastating flood, but in different parts of the world, including our continent. That's true. Different populations have experienced such a phenomenon at different times in history and in different parts of the globe. But to say that the entire surface of the planet was covered by water at the time of the biblical flood is wrong. This was not the case. Over time, however, large territories and even entire continents have fallen underwater, burying civilizations. For example, Mu, a large part of Lemuria, and especially Atlantis. Question 3. What is the reason or cause of the biblical flood, and what is its connection with the Watchers in the Book of Enoch? First, we need to know who these Watchers are. According to the Book of Enoch, the Watchers are considered sons of God who came down to earth and took wives from the daughters of men. From this union were born the Nephilim, huge and dangerous beings. The Nephilim are described in the Book of Enoch as ruthless, cannibalistic, and devourers of the earth's resources. Their atrocities include devouring resources. They consumed all the food of humans, and when the resources ran out, began to devour even humans. Cannibalism and vampirism. They ate human flesh and drank blood. Wars between Nephilim. They fought each other and destroyed their own people. From my point of view, the Watchers in the Book of Enoch are extraterrestrial beings with access to advanced technology who came to Earth and performed numerous genetic experiments to create hybrid human extraterrestrial beings in order to repopulate other planets or to genetically remake their own civilization. In the Book of Enoch, they are called sons of God to mask the truth that they were extraterrestrials. Essentially, all people on Earth and all beings in the universe are children or sons of God, because God is the source of all that exists. So the Watchers are extraterrestrial beings and are part of the Galactic Federation of Worlds. As I said, these Watchers in their genetic experiments have combined extraterrestrial DNA with human DNA and obtained all kinds of hybrid beings. This is how they have resulted, for example, the half-human, half-animal beings mentioned in Greek mythology, such as minotaurs, sirens, centaurs, but also vampires, werewolves, even if they are not half-human, half-animal, and so on. Some of these hybrid beings were apparently violent and dangerous, often attacking humans to feed on their flesh and blood. In the book The Forgotten Genesis, written by Radu Sinamar, it is stated that the flood represented not only a significant evolutionary leap, but also a necessary cleansing of areas affected by practices and tendencies incompatible with the proper development of the human being. This implies that the Nephilim, and even some of the extraterrestrial Watchers, committed many wrongdoings in the regions where they lived. As mentioned earlier, the Nephilim killed people, ate them, drank their blood, fought among themselves, and conquered peaceful populations. Evidence that people were killed or sacrificed in various rituals can be found in the mythologies of many cultures. For example, in the Middle East, in Canaan, Phoenicia, and Carthage, human sacrifices, especially children, were offered to the gods Baal and Moloch. The practice was called Tophet, and pits with burnt human remains have been discovered archaeologically. In ancient Anatolia, Turkey, in Hittite civilizations and other Anatolian cultures, occasional human sacrifices were practiced, especially during great crises, war, famine, epidemics. Skeletons of children and adolescents have been found in ritual contexts, near altars or in various pits. Even in the ancient Thracian and Dacian space, present-day Romania, the historian Herodotus writes about human sacrifices among the Getsi. Even today, there are people being sacrificed in satanic rituals carried out by some secret societies, because the Watchers and their Nephilim children are back on Earth. The flood of Noah's time, described in many ancient traditions, was not only caused by widespread violence, but also by the deep corruption of human nature and divine law. The Book of Enoch details how the Watchers descended to earth, took women as wives, and passed on to mankind perverse customs that degraded human spirituality and the human body. The giants born of these unnatural unions, called Nephilim, became cannibals and began to pervert everything living, leading to a world in which all flesh had perverted its way upon the earth. Genesis 6:12. In the Book of Enoch, chapter 7, it says that the earth itself complained and asked for divine intervention. In chapter 9, the archangels Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Uriel witness the bloodshed and wickedness on earth and ask for heavenly help. Then Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Uriel looked down from heaven and saw the whirlpool of blood flowing on the earth and the injustice being done. And they said one to another, "The voice of weeping reaches to the gates of heaven, and the earth mourns for the wickedness that is laid upon it." Also in Genesis chapter 6, verse 5, it says, "And the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was turned every day to evil only." This statement suggests that the people in those areas were not just limited to outward evil deeds, but were corrupted in a much deeper way. People's thoughts, desires, and imaginations had been perverted. It wasn't just about what they did, it was about what they became. Every motivation, every plan, every dream was tainted by selfishness, greed, lust, or hatred. They had gotten so far beyond the innocence and purity with which they had been created that their internal moral compass was completely destroyed. They no longer recognized the difference between right and wrong, and if they did, they no longer cared. Very similar to the situation today. Ultimately, the overwhelming wickedness of mankind before the flood led to divine judgment. The flood, described in the Bible, was not only an act of destruction, but also an act of mercy. Humanity had reached a point of no return, where the very existence of life on earth was threatened by its own wickedness. If this spiral of violence, corruption, and moral decay continued, there would be nothing good left. So the flood was a reboot, a new chance for humanity to start afresh, to remember the lessons of the past and avoid the same pitfalls. Just as the book Forgotten Genesis by Radu Sinamar states that, the flood also represented the possibility of a rebirth in the sense of a significant leap on the scale of evolution. So the flood was not a simple cataclysm, but a divine reaction to the profound corruption of the world. The triggering cause was the deviant and destructive behavior of the extraterrestrial beings, known from the Book of Enoch as the Watchers, and their Nephilim children who violated divine laws. The flood was allowed as a form of purification and restoration of cosmic balance. And now, the final question, and perhaps the most anticipated one. 4. What is the truth about Enlil and Enki regarding the Great Flood? Many say that Enlil was the one who decided on the flood because humanity had multiplied and was making too much noise, and he could no longer sleep. Those who make such claims are inspired by the Sumerian poem Atrahasis, but they do not know one very important thing, and that is that this poem is a forgery, a fabrication. In Zechariah Sitchin's 12th Planet book it says, "When the ancient Near East was gripped by great social and military upheaval, at the beginning of the 2nd millennium BCE, the date is wrong, not correct, Marduk was elevated in Babylon to the status of national god of Sumer and Akkad. Marduk was proclaimed king of the gods, replacing Enlil, and the other gods were forced to swear allegiance to him and come to live in Babylon, where their activities could be easily supervised. This usurpation of the Enlilship long after the zoo incident was accompanied by an extensive Babylonian effort to falsify ancient texts. The most important texts were rewritten and altered so as to make Marduk appear as the Lord of Heaven, the creator, the benefactor, the hero, instead of Anu or Enlil, or even Ninurta. So this text is clear evidence that the ancient Sumerian writings were altered and modified in favor of Marduk and certainly Enki, because he was his father at the time. And it wasn't just the ancient Sumerian texts that were altered or forged. If the ancient Sumerian texts were altered to put Marduk and Enki in a positive light, it is clear that the information was rewritten to turn Enlil into a villain. So how did things work out? Who decided the flood? Let's first look at what some important sources say about the flood, and then I'll explain how I think things stood and who decided the flood. The Bible. In Genesis, it is God, Yahweh, who decides upon the flood as a punishment for humanity's wickedness and corruption. The text explicitly mentions that the earth was full of wickedness, meaning violence, oppression, and that people had become completely devoted to evil. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that all the thoughts of his heart were turned every day only to evil. Genesis 6:5. So the Bible tells us that God decided the flood and explains that this event was a necessity. The Book of Enoch. This source confirms that God decided the flood as a punishment for the sins of the watchers and their descendants. The earth itself complained about its iniquities, and the archangels called for divine intervention. In the Gnostic texts, in the Apocrypha of John, and in the hypostasis of the archons, the flood appears as an initiative of Yaldabaoth, a false god, and his archons, who wanted to destroy incarnate beings of light and spiritually awaken people. In the hypostasis of the archons, it says, "Then the great archon, Yaldabaoth, said to his authorities, 'Come, let us bring a flood with our hands and destroy every creature from man to beast.' But the great Sophia from above sent her light to Noah. She warned him, and he and his family were hidden in a luminous cloud. By that light, Noah realized that the flood was coming and prepared himself." The Apocrypha of John says, "Then the supreme ruler Yaldabaoth realized that the people had retreated from his power. He cursed their destiny and planned to bring a flood upon man's creation. But the greatness of light remembered humanity and sent her power to Noah." So we can understand from the Gnostic writings that at that time, just as it is today, many people were spiritually awakened. They had begun to recognize the truth of their divine origin and could no longer be controlled by Yaldabaoth and his archons through fear, religion, and manipulation. That is why Yaldabaoth and his archons willed the destruction of humanity by flood. In Hindu mythology, the flood appears as a stage in the cosmic cycle called Pralaya, the end of one age and the beginning of another. The god Vishnu, as protector, saves the essence of the world, meaning the pure man, Manu, sacred knowledge, Vedas, animals and plants, to restart the cycle. In Hindu scriptures, the flood is not determined by anyone, but is seen as an act of balancing the cosmic order. The book Forgotten Genesis by Radu Sinamar mentions two categories of gods or extraterrestrial beings who are connected with the flood. The first group was made up of extraterrestrial civilizations that sought to exploit humans for their own self-interest, with no interest in the spiritual or intellectual evolution of humanity. This attitude led to major conflicts between different groups of gods, meaning extraterrestrials, because some of them supported the freedom of human beings to evolve. Conversely, gods with evil intentions wanted to be worshipped and have total control over humanity. They wanted to keep humans at a near animal level, hindering their development in order to use them for their own purposes. Subsequently, these aliens developed a plan to take total control of the planet, using a human elite hybridized with their DNA as intermediaries. The second group of extraterrestrial beings, also considered gods on Earth, came from another star system. They played a crucial role in preserving life on our planet. Perhaps because they knew the flood was coming, they created a DNA bank, collecting samples from living creatures in parts of Asia, Africa, and Europe. Thanks to their intervention, wildlife in the flood-affected areas was restored within a few decades, making a significant contribution to the recovery of post-flood ecosystems. From what presented so far, I deduce that there were at that time two groups of extraterrestrial beings, with different interests and opinions. Now let's see who these alien groups were. According to the Gnostic writings, Yaldabaoth, angry that humans were no longer obeying him because the divine spark within them had begun to awaken, and afraid of losing control over mankind, planned to bring a flood to wipe out every creature from man to beast. Yaldabaoth of Gnostic writings is none other than Enki. Enki is also the Canaanite god Baal, to whom human sacrifices were offered. According to the Old Testament, Leviticus 18:21, Jeremiah 19:5, the Canaanite gods Moloch and Baal demanded human sacrifices. As I said, Baal is Enki and Moloch is Marduk, his son. Marduk is also considered to be the first vampire created, which explains why he demanded human sacrifices, because he fed on the blood of the sacrificed. And not only him, but also his reptilian friends and other extraterrestrial species that prefer such food. Therefore, it is not surprising that their sons, the Nephilims, consumed human flesh, drank blood, and were violent. It is obvious, therefore, that the alien group led by Enki and Marduk wanted to trigger the flood in order to destroy, on the one hand, the incarnate beings of light, and on the other hand, the people who had begun to awaken spiritually. We have seen what it says in the book Forgotten Genesis by Radu Sinamar, that the gods with evil intentions, meaning evil extraterrestrials, wanted to be worshipped and to have total control over humanity. They wanted to keep humans at an almost animalistic level, hindering their development in order to use them for their own purposes. The situation then is very similar to today. Marduk and the evil aliens of then are the ones in control of humanity today. They are behind the wars on Earth, the vaccine of a few years ago, and all the evils and injustices that are happening. They were also involved in rigging the recent elections in our country, as well as in every other country on Earth where they have interests. Enki and Marduk, along with other evil extraterrestrial civilizations, form the group called the Galactic Federation of Worlds. Those watchers, or sons of God in the Book of Enoch, who have descended to Earth, are, in fact, extraterrestrial beings of this federation. They are the parents of the Nephilims, and the deeds committed by these Nephilims and their parents were, according to the Bible and Gnostic writings, the reason the flood was unleashed. As I said, there was a second group of extraterrestrial beings, the Enlil group. From the forgotten book of Genesis, we can deduce that they were the ones who advocated the freedom of human beings to evolve. I believe that they are also the ones who took DNA samples from plants and animals and helped restore the fauna after the flood. I believe that Enlil's group is the positive one, the one that has helped mankind, because Enlil has shown through his deeds that he cares about people. Enlil is the Egyptian god Thoth. Thoth gave people teachings in various fields: mathematics, sacred geometry, astronomy, alchemy, etc. He taught people writing, many occult, Hermetic, and Kabbalistic traditions from the post-ancient period to the Renaissance. Identify Thoth, who is Enlil, with the original source of esoteric wisdom. Enlil is Moses, the one who brought the Jewish people out of the slavery of Amun-Ra. And Amun-Ra is none other than Enki. Some people believe that Moses is the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten himself. Akhenaten is the first leader in known human history to promote the belief in one God, the divine source of creation. Yet he is called a heretic. Why? Because he urged people to pray to the true God, instead of the hundreds of Egyptian gods and goddesses, who were nothing more or less spiritually evolved extraterrestrial beings. Akhenaten was called a heretic even by the evil group of Enki and Marduk, who altered history and all areas of activity to their will. The book Forgotten Genesis by Radu Sinamar makes it clear. These entities like to be worshipped. The fact that Akhenaten directed people to the one God was a major offense to them, because they were losing their servants. This is why Akhenaten is now wrongly called a heretic. So who unleashed the biblical flood? Enki's group or Enlil's? There may have been a war between the two groups at the time, as an expression of a cosmic conflict, a battle between the forces of darkness and light. Enki and Marduk, together with their allied alien civilizations, seeing that incarnate beings of light and spiritually awakened people were regaining their divine knowledge, wished the total destruction of mankind by a flood designed to wipe out all traces of spiritual liberation. In opposition, the forces of light, the group of Enlil, allowed the same flood only in certain areas where customs harmful to the spiritual development of the human being were practiced as an act of purification to remove the corruption brought by the Nephilim and the Watchers. The fact that the flood did not occur all over the planet, but only in areas where practices were being carried out that were inappropriate for the proper development of human beings, indicates that Enlil's group imposed their will regarding the flood. Because if they hadn't intervened, Enki's group probably would have killed all the humans and all the animals. So my opinion is that Enlil's group simply carried out God's will, because the flood was the result of God's intervention, as the Bible and the Book of Enoch tell us. God decided the flood because of moral and spiritual corruption. I believe that many of the beings who perished during the biblical flood, such as the Nephilims, and perhaps even some of the alien watchers, are currently reincarnated, either in human bodies or in extraterrestrial forms. God has given them another chance to correct their behavior and cleanse their karma. Of the Nephilims, half human, half animal, such as centaurs, minotaurs, mermaids, and other such beings, they currently live in human bodies, go to work, and perhaps have a normal and even beautiful life. My belief is that God doesn't want to lose anyone. He only wants to guide beings back onto the right path and help them evolve. God showed mercy to Noah and his family, whom he considered righteous and blameless, but also to many other people, giving them a chance to survive. The Bible tells us that only Noah and his family survived the flood. But from the book Forgotten Genesis, written by Radu Sinamar, we can deduce that other people also escaped, namely those in areas of the earth where the corruption of the Nephilims had not reached, those areas not being flooded by the floodwaters. Thus, if God decided on the flood, he acted out of justice, but also out of mercy, because the flood was a punishment for sins committed, but also an opportunity for moral and spiritual rebirth. After the flood, mankind experienced a significant evolutionary leap. My guess is that all the knowledge, history, and science accumulated up to that point was transferred to other regions such as India and Tibet. For example, Hindu culture, as well as Egyptian, Greek, and Norse, have their roots in the ancient territories of Romania. Egyptian esoteric and spiritual knowledge transmitted by the god Thoth and the goddess Isis was also relocated to Tibet or perhaps other areas. These transfers ensured the continuity of spiritual and scientific traditions, contributing to the further development of humanity. In conclusion, the flood represents a key moment in human history, a symbol of the conflict between the forces of darkness, which sought to suppress spiritual awakening and destroy humanity, and the forces of light, which used the flood to purify and regenerate the earth. The result was a rebirth of humanity that opened a new chapter in the spiritual evolution of the human species.